Walker is joining us from Pax8. He is a Copilot expert. He knows lots and lots about Copilot, and there's new information coming out all of the time, as well as new capabilities. As AI continues to grow, we're going to see it just continue to flourish, and the capabilities increase. So with that being said, let's start off with this, getting started with Copilot.
Hey everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Melissa. So I recently had the opportunity to go spend some time with the Microsoft team on site in San Diego. And the context of that was really around, where are different applications for large language model, artificial intelligence, which is in essence what the Copilot product is, kind of a commercial, protected, and commoditized version of that. We're going to spend a little time talking about practical application, conceptual, what's included with the Copilot product, what it's built to serve in terms of business purposes and needs. Spend a little bit of time on the different licensing. So Copilot is available in many different flavors. If people on this call have been around the block in terms of Microsoft for a while, you may be getting deja vu with like Azure Everything naming convention, Active Directory, information protection, et cetera. Copilot's not super different. There are many different brands of Copilot. The two that we're really going to be focusing on today is going to be the Copilot, formerly Bing Chat Enterprise, so the version that's included with the Edge browser on the Windows operating system if you've opted into that, and also the Copilot for Microsoft 365 product, which is the same architecture and conceptual product. However, it's applied to the Microsoft 365 applications and services. So that's what's going to live inside of your tenant and pull specific data that pertains to things in SharePoint, and across your different applications. So think Excel, PowerPoint, Word, etc.
All right.
So we've got a little table of contents here. It's going to talk about the different slides. If you guys after the fact want to come back and renew these, get with your team over here, excuse me, and make sure that, you tell them, hey, here's what I'm looking to get out of this. But Outsource IT Solutions Group and we work very closely. There's going to be a little bit of back-end support, I think, required to have these conversations around, and we've already had this with Outsource, but kind of to that next step of, okay, this is what the product does, but then how do we actually safely apply it in an environment? So talk about being safe with the AI-powered chat. That's really going to focus on the Bing Chat Enterprise or Copilot product. And that's the one that most people can interface with. You see a little pop-up here on the right. This is what it looks like if you access it through the browser. But this one has a couple of differentiators from the rest of the AI or generative AI products that are out on the market. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into this, but I just want to start by saying the security contained in this product from Microsoft is what sets it apart from other generative AI like ChatGPT by itself, right? The idea here is that whenever you're signed in with your Microsoft 365 account, it's going to track you across all of your applications, but also the Edge browser and the Copilot interface. And what that means for you guys from a security perspective is that none of your questions or queries are going to be saved in plain text. And none of the outputs, so the responses to your prompts, are going to be saved either. So there is a necessity from your perspective to export anything that you get out of the Copilot interface that you want to keep. But then also keep in mind that you can rest assured on the back end that Microsoft is not using that data for anything to train their model. And so you don't have to be as choosy about what pieces of information you're feeding into Copilot. They have, and we'll break it down on another slide, but they have a couple of fail-safes and safeguards in place, like no human eyes on any of the data that's generated out of these reports and audit logs, and then also protecting your identity and the identity of any of the information pertaining to your company, making sure that that doesn't leave the ecosystem. But this is a product that pulls from information that's available to it. So again, we're going back to the two that we're talking about today, Copilot, formerly Bing Chat Enterprise, or as they're calling it, the Copilot, or Copilot for Microsoft 365. So just keep in mind that between these two, there is some data protections in place from Microsoft. We'll deep dive into that. But if you're going to use a product like this, it's going to have more security in place than anything else that you're going to find in terms of OpenAI. And so we kind of we talk about this concept in terms of ever evolving technological landscapes of when tools become available, you have people that are going through the education system right now, universities or even high schools, and then starting to break into the workforce. And you already have some people in the workforce that are already familiar with these AI tools. And so the idea here is that Microsoft has given you a way to put this in the hands of your employees and yourselves in a safe way, and also make sure that they're using something that has corporate data governance behind it, instead of ChatGPT 4. If you yourself or anybody at your organization is having emails proofread or drafted or anything like that, we want to pay close attention to where that data is actually going after the fact, right? Do we want it to go out and train the model? Not necessarily. Do we want it to pull off of an already built off model? Absolutely. And that's where the architecture underpinning Copilot comes from, is that base technology with corporate data governance in play. So if we go to the next slide here, we'll start diving in a little bit more in depth. If you guys have questions too, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have a little Q&A time at the end, and I'll try to get to everybody's question if that's possible. If not, we'll work together after the fact to make sure that your questions are answered. And I'm going to say this about the Copilot product. It is one of those things where almost everybody on the call here today, so long as you're on a Microsoft licensing package that isn't Exchange Online or apps for business, apps for enterprise, you're going to have access to this. If you open up the Edge browser, you're going to look for the little Copilot ribbon. It's blue in the Edge browser, but it's going to be at the top right. So I'll show you that in real time here on today's call. But just anybody following along at home, keep in mind that you can also access this service. Make sure you're signed in. You'll see a little protected thing next to the Copilot interface. So this, again, formerly Bing Chat Enterprise. If you see that out in the space, it is Copilot. So we just call it Copilot, Copilot. Simple enough, or in Microsoft's terms, it's clear as mud, right? So this is one of the things where Outsource has been kind of a pioneer on the AI space, learning how to use it, how it's applicable, and then getting primed to facilitate the adoption of some of these technologies across all of y'all on the call here today. So what I want you guys and gals to be thinking about as we're running through this presentation, as I bring up some examples of ways to apply the Copilot product, start thinking about day-to-day processes that you might be able to implement this sort of technology into to increase efficiency and reduce the amount of time on menial tasks. And we're going to come back to this, but what I call Copilot in the context of day-to-day operations and business efficiency, it really functions like an executive AI assistant. And it's a little bit different in terms of some of the other products that have hit market, in the sense that it doesn't just do one thing. And so, we might be familiar with like note-taking chatbots, or if you guys have ever done as a hobby like eBay or any of these other sources where things come up for auction, you have bots that will bid on these. These are automated process or robotic process automation tools in essence, and they're built on top of these if-then prompts, right? Copilot has a large language model underpinning the architecture of the product. And what that means is, in simple terms, you can ask it plain English questions, or you can give it prompts. And prompts we'll talk a little bit more about, but the prompts will then generate content. So there's where the generative AI comes out of it, right? And that can be things like emails, as we touched on. It could be Word documents, PowerPoint presentations. It could be Excel documents pulling from a Word document. If you need to get numbers out of a large financial statement, let's say, and then you want to manipulate those numbers, think about Copilot in the context of pulling the information out of the Word document and generating an Excel file based on that information, or vice versa. So it's really quite cool when you're just thinking about kind of the day-to-day things that take up a lot of time. And it's like, wow, if I could make a PowerPoint presentation in 5 minutes rather than 45, that would be awesome. And that's another thing to keep in mind as we're running through this too, is the Copilot product, the way that it's priced. The easiest way to conceptualize that is to work backwards and to say, if we are paying people to do this work, let's say $30 an hour, depending on where you are, that might be really competitive or not so competitive. But if you use that as an example, then you think about the context of the Copilot product has to save you 12 hours of time throughout a 365-day period for it to break even. So that's where the kind of the concept of the pricing and then the value comes into play. It's like, okay, if we break this down into these kind of day-to-day tasks, and we're going to run through a couple examples here, then you could put an actual time amount and then attach the dollar amount to that of what it's worth to you. And as we go through this, I'll throw in some anecdotal examples too, because I am not a very strong Excel user, but I do use it quite a bit. And so if we move to the next one here, we already talked a little about the security, so we'll move on from that. But we're used to searching the internet with keywords. So if you guys have been around as long as I have, you remember like AskJeeves.com and then Ask.com, and then Google was kind of the big name, right? These are search engines that work off of keywords, and the keywords are searching any of the web pages that are out there on the internet to look for those keywords. And the more that you have, the higher the promotion is in terms of the search result back, is the basic format of how that works, right? So if I'm searching Guest Ranch, Colorado, and then I throw fly fishing in there, it's going to actually narrow that down because some places offer it and some places don't. So that's the basic concept here. With Copilot, it is actually taking the prompts that you put in English, like compare or analyze or summarize this web page, summarize the difference and give me a compelling argument why I should buy a Ford truck over a Chevy truck as an example, or vice versa. And it's going to do that for you in real time and cite sources. And the other side of it too is that, again, going back to the security, it doesn't leak this information out to the internet at large. It's not going to be in the hands of Microsoft using consumer trends or driving decisions based on that. It's protected in the terms of your search is your search and your results are your results. Okay, so the customized answers piece is really cool, and it also has the capabilities we'll show you to do follow-up questions. So if you ask it to do something like, I'll give you an example of a bad prompt. Tell me why a Ford truck is great. That it's going to give you just a laundry list of things that people like about it. It's going to pull from Consumer Reports directly from the Ford website, but it's not going to give you any of the cons. So maybe you want to compare and contrast options like a Dell computer versus a Lenovo is another example. Why would I want to buy one over the other? And if you're in a capacity where you're trying to make informed decisions on a day-to-day basis that are actually going to drive the direction of the business, using a tool like this is a really helpful way to get information fast and cited with sources, so you can always go back and check it. Perhaps we don't want to pull any information that's not from Microsoft's website or not from Dell or Lenovo, as an example. We don't want Consumer Reports in the mix. You can get as specific as that with your prompts. So this is just going to underscore the power of this tool and what it can do for you. All right, so again, why Copilot? Why not use one of the other ones that are out there that are either free or paid? Really, it comes down to security and corporate data governance. We don't want any of the information that we're feeding into this to go out to the internet at large, and therefore the Copilot product is the preferred method for businesses in the United States to access this technology, to use it in a constructive and safe manner. These are some of the reasons that you might want to consider it. Again, like I said, it cites the sources. It's built on a powerful AI model, which is already proven out there in the market. It doesn't have a knowledge cutoff, meaning that it's always up to date with answers. So, sometimes what you'll see with other AI models that are out there is at the point where the version history update stops, that's where the knowledge stops. So if a new article drops, let's say after that date, then it's not going to be included in the generative output of that tool. Microsoft is always kept up to date. So that's a difference. And then the commercial data protection piece of this, of course, is very important.
Yeah, I mean, with HIPAA and everything, and all of the financial sector information that needs to be kept private, I mean, that is so important. I'm really glad that we have, the capability to protect all of our data so simply and already included in, our subscriptions from Microsoft. So it's great.
Absolutely. And just to hang out here on this slide for 1 second, there is another piece of the puzzle here that I've talked to Melissa and team about, but this is important for everyone on the call to consider, is Copilot as a product, and we're talking the Microsoft 365 version. So again, the differentiator being instead of pulling from the internet at large, it pulls from data stored directly in the tenant itself, does require some sort of data protection and data management to take place before you can effectively use the tool. And what I'll give you an example here. You might have an organization set up with SharePoint sites. This is a fairly common scenario. Those SharePoint sites might be departmental. So you might have HR in one SharePoint site, sales in another. C-staff has access to all as like a typical configuration. If you don't have any security groups or data loss prevention policies in place, conceptually, there's the possibility that the introduction of Copilot, while not creating any security vulnerabilities, can expose existing security vulnerabilities. So if you have like a ransomware attack and somebody gets access to a salesperson's email address and set of credentials, because these are the people that are receiving and sending emails, it's more likely to happen through an inbox attack. Then if they have the Copilot product also in play and you don't have restricted access on documentation outside of their specific role, you might have a scenario in which Copilot can retrieve for that user, that bad actor, payroll information or anything else that's going to be PII that might be contained elsewhere within the tenant, and at least conceptually shouldn't be accessed by people outside of the department. But now with a powerful tool in play, it's important to have the kind of the back end stuff set up. So we talk about enterprise mobility and security E3 as the baseline because of the intra ID and the data loss prevention. Outside of the scope of that, there's other things like Intune for mobile device management. Not as relevant for this, but it is relevant when you're accessing company data on a personal device, which is also another common scenario out there, because we want to make sure that that's all protected as well in case the device itself is lost or compromised or what have you, right? And so all these things play together to have a good baseline security approach to layer Copilot on top of to get the most efficiency out of it, but also in a way that mitigates risk to the maximum level possible.
Right, which is why it's so important to get your managed service provider involved in the deployment of Copilot and beforehand to take a look at all those security settings, which we can definitely do for you. And we already know your environment as well. So if if we're already your managed service provider and we already know your environment, we've set up your SharePoint for you, it's that much less time to go ahead and do a deep dive and review all of those security settings and make sure that everything is set up properly so that there's no chance of that data breach, or the chance is much, much less. Obviously, bad actors, like you said, are going to find any way that they can to get to the information that, any little exploit, any little leak. But we definitely want to make sure that, the proper scenario is completed before we deploy Copilot for you guys, and get that all in place.
Absolutely. And the one that we really care about here, I mean, all of them, of course, are important. Ransomware less so in this case because it locks down the entire tenant. But the ones that you really want to watch out for are, phishing attacks, fake landing pages, spear phishing, anything that's going to allow somebody to gain access to your tenant and therefore, by extension, the data is going to be important to lock that down with things like multi-factor authentication, security groups, data loss prevention policies. And like Melissa said, that's where your MSP comes into play, because the licensing does not guarantee that these are turned on by default. That's an important distinction, not only in the context of Copilot, but just Microsoft in general. Just having the license entitlement does not guarantee that your baseline policies are set up. Okay. So the next one over here in terms of slides is how you can access the Copilot. This is, again, the free version that everybody on the call should have access to. You can go to bing.com/chat, Microsoft Edge sidebar. That's the one that we looked at. There's a mobile app for it. You've got Windows operating system. So if you turn that on, then you have a little Copilot ribbon on your taskbar at the bottom. Easy to access it that way. You can always go to copilot.microsoft.com. Ideally, Microsoft wants you working out of the Edge browser, but it's not strictly required. There are some differences in functionality that we'll talk about here. So if you go to the next slide here, Melissa, these are the differences between Chrome and Microsoft Edge, both of these being Chromium browsers, but Edge having more of an advantage when it comes to Copilot interface and functionality.
Yeah, I've had a chance to, work with this and play around. I've been using Copilot since it became available in the Edge platform, the Chat GPT type function of it, to go ahead and play with it and get and learn how to write my prompts so that I can get the information that I need. So that's the first step for you guys, is actually going into that Microsoft Edge browser or even Chrome and going to the Copilot website, typing that in and playing around with that and asking the right questions and learning to use the right words so that you can get the information that you need uh, in a more effective manner.
Absolutely. All right. So we'll move through these ones. A lot of these are going to be repeats. So if you guys have a little deja vu, no problem at all. It's by design. The next slide here is about protecting the data. So why you want to use it for chat. This is just a reiteration of what we already talked about. You sign in with your work account. That's your identity access control. No human eyes on the Microsoft side. And then after everything is generated, prompts and generative output are discarded. They're not saved. So this is important because you don't want your data just out there, right? So to actually get started with it, we're going to do kind of a live walkthrough here and show you guys, anybody following along with us, if you've already got it pulled up by now, good, just hang on for a second. Anybody who's working on getting it pulled up, if you want to do this at the same time we're walking through, this is the instructions on the next slide here. So sign in with your work account, make sure it's a Microsoft account. That's important here. If it's not a Microsoft or Microsoft joined account, then you're not going to have that same level of data protection. You'll confirm that you are indeed signed in and protected with this little protected thing. There's a little pop out there in that image so you can see what it looks like. But this signifies that everything is being protected. You're successfully signed in. And if you're not, then it doesn't protect your data. So that's important to note.
Super important.
Absolutely. Next slide here, we've got just a visual tour of Copilot. So I want to show you all the different components that you're going to see on your screen. If you haven't used it before, or even the first time you launch it, or even any other time you launch the Copilot interface, it's going to give you some suggested prompts. These are things that, if you're just looking to sort of test your knowledge or get familiar with the product, it's going to give you a great launch pad to do that with some suggestions based on popular searches or requests for the Copilot product. You've got a couple more places where it'll tell you that you're protected. I always just look for the little green badge. That's going to tell you, hey, confirmation visually, I'm signed in, everything's good to go. I can start dumping emails in here or whatever you're using it for. And then conversation styles. So when you're generating content with the Copilot product, it does allow you some flexibility in terms of how you input your prompt and how the output, the generative content is going to be formatted. So things like casual, friendly, business professional. You can even provide context, like I'm going to present this to a board of investors, or I'm a sales manager and I'm going to present this to my team as an initiative. So you can give it the context to manipulate the output, and then it's going to give it to you in a format that's specified by you. And that's helpful too, especially because you might be talking similar content, but to different audiences. And so it's smart enough to know, what a board member is going to be interested in versus somebody who is a sales professional, right? All right. So these ones are going to be a little quick. We're just going to run through them, but this is the different ways to access the Copilot product. So this next one here, get to know it in Windows. It's very similar. It's just going to have a little sidebar pop up instead of taking up the whole page. But again, you can see that the layout is either going to be full page or sidebar. That's really the two things that you need to take away from these slides. Depends on how you access it. And I've used the word prompt a lot in this presentation already and talking to you guys about, what does the Copilot product do and how do you interface with it. So prompt basically is just you telling it what needs to happen. And this is where I tie it back to the concept of being an executive AI assistant. Because if you think about it through the lens of that, what does an executive assistant do? They're competent professionals out in the space that help you do tasks that you either don't have time for or that you're not proficient at. For me, if I had an executive assistant, I would really ask them to help me with expense reports. That's something that I'm just not very strong with, right? But I need to do it all the time. So think about this as your executive AI assistant. And in real life, as with the Copilot product, the more specific you are, the better results you're going to get.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because if you're not specific about your audience or you're not specific about what you need out of the goal, it's just like if I'm giving my kids instructions and I don't give them the breakdown of exactly what I want, I'm not going to get the right thing. I'm going to get a halfway done job when I give them chores. So I have to be very specific. The bathroom cleaning means, to do all of the different steps. So it's the same thing with a prompt. You have to give them enough information so that they can get the job done, which AI is the they in this instance. So that's how I like to think of it, and it works. So
Good example too, because yeah, think about it. It's complex, but every time you start a chat, you're starting from scratch. So almost like interfacing with kids, they're not going to necessarily remember the last time that you asked them to clean the bathroom and that they had to, put things away, clean off the floor, close drawers, close cabinets. These are the things that with the Copilot interface is always going to start out from square one. Now you can stack prompts on top of previous responses, but every session, because of that data protection, is going to be its own interface. Over time, it will begin to learn your preferences and it'll give you more accurate responses. Like anecdotally, because I do Microsoft licensing, it's 90% of what I spend my day on. There is a preference for me to use Microsoft sources for anything that Copilot generates. And so whenever I ask it to rewrite it, but only source Microsoft articles or web pages, it's going to learn over time that I prefer Microsoft results, and it's going to push those to the top. And so there is a little bit of a customization and learning component here as you continue to interface with the product. All of that, of course, is just tracked through usage metrics and source metrics, not the actual prompts or the outputs, again, because of Microsoft's data protection in play, but just like the large picture of what you're trying to accomplish and what you prefer versus what you do not. And here's some examples on the next slide here of what it makes an effective prompt versus a bad prompt or less effective. So again, specific and detailed, full sentences with instructions, tell it what you want it to do and how you want it to do it. And then always, if you can, because it's just going to give you a generic if you don't, get in there with the tone, the purpose, the preferred format. As an example, right down here, recap the findings of the article I've copied below. You could just paste the web page for that. Include top 3 concerns, provide the answer in 2 to 3 paragraphs, and use a business tone. So here we did a couple of things that are awesome. We said we want the specific top 3 concerns. So there might be more concerns, but we want the 3. We don't want it more than 3 paragraphs, and we want it in the tone of a business conversation. So this is going to give you something that you can workshop or might even be ready to just disseminate to the rest of the team because we were specific. However, on the other side of this same workflow, we said recap article, right? That's going to give us, that means many things to many people, right? And same thing for Copilot and any other large language AI model. That might be to just recap it, to tell me what the article talked about. It might not be as specific as give me the top 3 concerns. So important as you're architecting these prompts and you're thinking about interfacing with the Copilot product to keep in mind the ways to get the most value out of it is going to be as specific as possible.
yeah, and I found that when I do this, I've learned at first I was not very good at it and I had to do follow-up questions, obviously. So I would be not specific enough, and then I'd have to ask another question to narrow down what I really wanted to get to. But then over time, as you use it more and more, you remember like, oh gosh, yeah, I definitely want this included in my findings. So you learn to, it's kind of training yourself to, just like when you're training a dog, you're not really training the dog, you're training yourself to do the correct thing. And then the animal, or in this case, AI, gets it. So,
Yep, absolutely. That's a great real world example. And on this next slide, it actually breaks that down in that exact format. So we've done our prompt, we've checked our sources, but now maybe we weren't specific enough and we need to continue the conversation. So like Melissa was saying, that functionality is built in. So you can ask follow-up questions, you can ask it to rewrite, give it some extra criteria, maybe drop a few criteria, whatever to get your desired output at the end as the end result of that interfacing with Copilot. So this is just an example of how that can go through. On the next slide here, we'll show you how to check your sources. They're always going to be at the bottom of whatever generative output is contained within the Copilot interface. You can click on them, you can hover over them, and it'll tell you exactly where it's coming from. We're just going to move kind of quickly through these because I want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. Keep in mind, we've already touched on this, but as a short-term memory, so you need to download your contents. And then if you want to save or ask follow-up questions, you don't want to start a new topic because that will erase anything you've already done. So make sure that you've gotten everything out of what you want before you move on to a new topic, or you close the browser window, or you open up a new one, because keeping in mind that while it will remember some of those preferences, it's not going to save the actual back and forth from every session that you have within Copilot. So getting the most out of it. This is where I think as an audience member, I'm hoping you guys are already starting to have these thoughts of how I'm going to apply this in my day-to-day or where it's going to save me some time. But here's some examples that we can pull from. So maybe you're comparing, I'm going to go back to the vehicle analogy, Ford trucks and Chevy trucks. You found some great articles and you really want the quick hitting points from each of them. Summarize the content. You collected ideas from different web pages. You're ready to write them up as an email or a report. So maybe you're sending that out to somebody internal in the organization, a sales prospect. Write an email based on these bullet points. Can't find stock images that match your presentation. Like, for example, I was sitting down with another partner, NetGain, and they wanted us to come up with an image of their CEO flying an airplane, riding on an airplane through the Alps with the logo on the airplane. That's not going to exist on the internet, I guarantee it. But Copilot can generate an image just like that, and it was actually pretty good for what it was. So have fun with that. That's an entertaining thing to do, and it's really helpful in a business purpose, not just for memes or whatever. For a business purpose, if you're looking for something specific that doesn't exist. So maybe you want to see your company logo on a specific landscape or doing something, right? So this is where it can get really cool for that. So maybe you pulled up some blog post videos to learn something new. An excellent example of this would be VLOOKUP formulas in Excel. I use them all the time, but whatever reason, my brain just doesn't function that way, and I always have to relearn it. So if you want to use the Copilot product, this is again Copilot from Microsoft 365. If you're actually working out of Excel, you can ask it to explain why the formula is architected the way that it's architected and break down the individual components, and then even have it write you a sample formula to accomplish whatever it is you're looking to do. So if I wanted a VLOOKUP formula to pull tenant ID based off of domain and then put that on a list of customers to pre-populate that for order building, that's like a real world example of something that I might have to do. I could have Copilot help me explain why and also generate that VLOOKUP formula. I can just copy and paste it, drop it in my Excel spreadsheet. Or if you're working out a Copilot from Microsoft 365, maybe just have Copilot write that formula for you. Got multiple articles, different perspectives, can't make a decision, Ford versus Chevy. This is another prime example. It's still out there in the zeitgeist, right? So compare the option and another option and give me the pros and cons. That's a real example. You could also apply it to hardware. Like I'm trying to buy computers. Do I buy Dell? Do I buy Lenovo? HP, maybe throw that in the mix, right? It'll compare it for you. It'll give you the pros and cons. And if you want more specific information, that's where you continue the conversation, ask follow-ups. So a lot of versatility built into it. It's definitely a powerful tool. And I'm going to show you guys how to do like a sample prompt. So if we move into this next slide here, there's a couple here. The sample prompts are the ones that are going to pre-populate when you launch the Edge browser. And then you launch the Copilot interface, or if you go directly to the Copilot interface, depending on how you access it, you're going to have these ready to go. So if you're looking for somewhere to start, check out the sample prompts. They're really helpful. It's jumping off point. And then the next thing that you guys can do is try summarizing a web page, PDF or document. PDF or document is going to require the Copilot for Microsoft 365 license, because again, what happens with Copilot for Microsoft 365 is it creates a semantic index of all the information within your Microsoft tenancy. And then similar to the Copilot product that references the web at large, it's going to reference that information contained across your documents, your files, anything that's stored on the Microsoft Dataverse, which is kind of the catch-all term for SharePoint, OneDrive, and then Dataverse at large, which could be for like Dynamics 365 or Power Applications. Anything that's stored in the Microsoft ecosystem is going to be what it's pulling from. So play around with that a little bit. If you have the free version, web page is a great place to start. Once you transition into the actual paid Microsoft 365 version, then that's when you can start referencing your specific documents. So maybe you have a financial earning report from last year. You want to summarize that, give me the good, give me the bad, make the bad seem less bad, and then I'm going to present that to a board of investors. It will write that for you. And so this is where I think, tying it into actually where it's going to start saving you time and create more efficiencies. Applying it to real world day-to-day operations is where you're going to start connecting the dots there and really kind of get a picture of what this tool can do for you. So keep moving through here. Compose template is a really helpful thing to play around. Create an email based on web content. We already did that one. So we've probably skipped through that. Compose template, that's going to do professional customer ready content. So if you need something that's presentable to customers, again, think Copilot. Try creating an image from your imagination is the next slide on here. And so I give you an example of that. Somebody flying on top of a plane through the Alps. Are you ever going to find that in the wild? No, probably not. But you can generate it. Anything your imagination truly is the limitation here. All right, and visual search. So this is actually interesting. You could take a picture of a chart that you drew on a whiteboard. This could be like a flow chart of create great product, find customers, keep customers, profit. Like just a little something fun, right? You could write that up on a whiteboard. You could take a picture of it, and then you could search it. And then what it could pull back is a business model based on exactly what you described that somebody already wrote up. Just as an example, if it's on the internet, there it is as a reference. Maybe you've done something similar for yourselves internally and you're trying to find a specific document. And hopefully you've already done some data operations and cleanup to make sure that everything is easy to find and easily identifiable. But even if you haven't, then you can search for something specifically if you have an excerpt from it or you just draw it out in plain English. It's almost like a reverse search, but using an image. And so that's really quite cool. All right, workday efficiency. So this is, again, kind of tying it back to how we're going to actually put this thing in practice, start making it work for its keep. Summarizing PDFs, drafting emails, generating images, learning new skills. So I use the example of Excel, but that could mean many things to many different people, and then getting answers for specific and complex questions. All of this is stuff that is obviously doable without the Copilot product, but again, as an efficiency play here, this is meant to speed you up and take any average end user and make them a power user across all of the Microsoft applications in the Office 365 suite. And that includes Outlook too. So if we're thinking emails here, that is also relevant to the conversation. That is something that is within the purview of what Microsoft Copilot can provide. All right, so that is the meat and potatoes of the presentation here on the Copilot product. Hopefully that's at least a starting point to get you guys familiar with it, what it can do, and start thinking about different ways to apply it to your day-to-day business. And then Melissa, we've got a little time left here at the end for Q&A. Do we have anything
I do, yeah.
pressing?
We have a couple of questions here. It looks like we have Keith, who asked if you can you upload a PDF to Copilot for summarizing, or do you have to cut and paste?
Okay, so if you have Copilot for Microsoft 365 and you have that PDF saved in SharePoint or OneDrive, then you just reference it within the Copilot interface. So you can click and drag it, or you can just start typing /, and that's a /, and then it's going to pull up your documents. You could start searching for the title of it and then load it in that way. If you're using the web version, you'd have to copy paste. So this is where that kind of Copilot from Microsoft 365 product comes into its own. If you have a bunch of documents that you're trying to reference that are stored at the Microsoft tenant level, so within the Dataverse is kind of the catch-all term for that, just meaning that it's written in the Commons Data Service or CDS language format and stored in Microsoft servers. So yeah, you can do it either way. And if you want to attach the PDF itself, then that's where we need the Copilot for Microsoft 365, and that PDF has to be stored at the tenant level.
All right. And then Creed also, we had a question from Creed who asked if, how do I attach a PDF for Copilot to summarize? I think that we just answered that question as well.
Yeah.
However, Creed, let us know if we did not, okay?
Yeah, and then Ryan, it looks like is in here with how up to date is Copilot. It's as up to date as the browser itself. So if it's in the internet, then it's up to date. So it really does there's not a huge or let's say not a palpable delay between when things hit the internet and when they are live in Copilot as something that's referenceable, if that makes sense. There's a slight delay, of course. I mean, anything that goes through there has to be fact checked, I guess in today's is the term for that. But so long as it's a verified source, this is again where Copilot's a little bit different, then it will be included in the results for any inquiry that you might make to it.
Um, so the only other thing, I don't see any other questions, but I just wanted to clarify, and I know we talked about Copilot a lot, and I think a lot of people, it's still also new and fresh using the term Copilot. I just want to clarify to everybody that there's like lots of different Copilots. So, because I get that question all the time. They're like, well, what do you mean? I've got Copilot or Copilot's free. It's included in my subscription, but they're rolling out with all of these different Copilot versions that have more and more capabilities. So while the online version is included in subscriptions that have enterprise level security, um, then there's Copilot for 365, there's Copilot for Dynamics, there's going to be there's Copilot for security. So there's a lot of different flavors of Copilot. So the wording when you're asking about Copilot with your sales reps or reaching out to outsource or your managed service provider or whoever you're asking questions about Copilot, make sure that you're specific about which one you're looking for, or you ask for help with like knowing which one you actually need. Um,
Exactly. And so I usually work backwards from the workload in question, and then there's going to be a Copilot product to match. Not all of them right now, but most of them do. So Dynamics is a good call out. Security is a good call out. Think about the different Copilot products on the same basic architecture of taking large language model input and then generating either actions or content, right? And so if you work backwards that direction, what are we working out of? Dynamics, Copilot. There is one for sales. It's specific to Dynamics CRM. There you go. But for most day-to-day operations, we're either working out of the internet, our inbox, or the different Microsoft apps. At least most people are, and so therefore, this presentation is tailored to those two specific Copilot products: Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot, which are the ones that we showcased here today, focusing on the free version that comes with the web browser, because everybody can kind of get their feet wet with that before you dive in head first on the actual paid version. But keep in mind that the functionality and the interfacing, like Melissa was saying, is going to be the same across the different products. Just which workload are we working outside of?
right. Yeah, and that's really important. So Brian Bruns has asked if you can have multiple instances of Copilot open at the same time in the web browser.
No, no. So it's going to be one-to-one, just one interface with Copilot. And that's true also if you're using Copilot from Microsoft 365. You can ask it a question that might reach outside of the purview of what it can do. And then it will say, wow, I found some results on the web. Would you like those? Yes. Right. So it's a one Copilot interface. And then as you bring the licenses online, it enhances the functionality of that Copilot interface, is probably the easiest way to conceptualize it. And
Perfect.
then is the free web version as good as the 365? Yeah, again, depending on what you're trying to do with it, right? The Microsoft 365 version is going to be specific to content stored within the Microsoft tenant. So documents, files, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, right? These are the things that you would use the Copilot for Microsoft 365 license for, or Outlook is another one. And then the free version is going to be the same look and feel. It's just pulling from the internet instead.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't have to, like, if you had the paid version, you wouldn't have to copy and paste information up into the free version. You could just reference the information, ask it for that information right from where you're at,
Right.
in Outlook itself. And that would save you some time. And you wouldn't have to be poking around in different windows. So definitely start with the free version, get your feet wet, and then reach out to us. And we can get you going with the paid version once you're comfortable enough so that you can not be having to copy and paste everywhere and reference things that way.
Yeah, and you get more utility out of actually generating content with the Copilot for Microsoft 365. Because if you ask the free version to make you a PowerPoint presentation based on financial data, as an example, it's not going to do that for you. But you have to have the Microsoft 365 Copilot for that to happen because it plugs into the applications itself. And that's really a big differentiator here too, if you're looking for it to generate content as either a starting point or a final presentation to send off or show to somebody else, right?
Yeah, so a roundabout answer there, Malcolm, but I think we covered that pretty well. Any other questions out there? Check the Q&A section as well. I think we're good. If we don't have any more questions, I really want to thank you, Walker, for all your time. And I want to thank everybody here for participating. And definitely reach out to Outsource and follow up with any questions that you might have. And we look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Melissa, and I appreciate everybody being on the call here today. So if you have any questions, reach out to Outsource, and we'll be happy to help you out.